Namaste to all the distinguished participants and especially my very dear friends from Nepal. I thought I would briefly talk about four sets of issues. The first is the current domestic political situation in Nepal. The second is the process of rapprochement that has begun with India. And third, I thought a little bit about China. And, finally, there is this big issue where the US is involved in Nepal, and this is that Millennium Challenge Cooperation Project. So I thought, briefly I'll talk about these four issues. Now, the current domestic political situation seems to be heating up again in Nepal, especially within the Nepalese Communist Party. And we have Deepak Bhatt here. I think he'll be able to enlighten us more about what's happening. But in recent weeks, there has been a very acrimonious exchange of letters between the co-chairman, the two co-chairmen, Prachand and Prime Minister Oli. There's been a meeting between Prime Minister Oli and Sher Bahadur Deuba of the Nepali Congress. There are also reports that the Chinese ambassador has been very active in trying to patch up things within the Nepalese Communist Party. So the situation is somewhat confusing. And, there's all kinds of rumors and speculations going on in terms of what is going to happen. Will the party survive intact? Will the party break? Could there be midterm elections? So all kinds of speculation. So it's a confusing situation, and a lot seems to be going on. Now, as far as India is concerned, I think we have taken a conscious decision, and rightly so, that independent of the domestic political turmoil and churning that's going on in Nepal, it's not a good idea to, hold up our bilateral cooperation to the domestic political processes in Nepal. I think in the past we were waiting for some sort of political stability to emerge before initiating a dialogue. But I think, the assessment right now seems to be that, and rightly so, that our bilateral cooperation is very, very important. And we shouldn't have too long a hiatus. And so we've had the visit of, our head of the external intelligence. We've had our army chiefs visit. As Director VIF mentioned, our foreign secretary is going there. And I believe there is likely to be a joint commission meeting at the foreign ministers level in Delhi sometime later. So clearly, I think our bilateral relationship and cooperation is back on track. And I think this is a very, very positive development. And, I think there has been a very positive gesture during General Narwane's visit when he was made the Honorary General of the Nepalese Army. And that's symbolically very important for the relationship between the two countries and the two armies. I think we also now need a substantive gesture or some substantive agreement, something that will catch the imagination of the peoples of the two countries and really contribute to further strengthening the relationship. And one low-hanging fruit, I think, is the Pancheshwar multipurpose project on the river Mahakali. As you know, the river Mahakali has, in recent months, become a bone of contention because of the boundary dispute between the two countries. I think we should really now make this river a river of cooperation. And I think the Pancheshwar project is something that can do exactly that. And the joint DPR for the project is almost ready. There are one or two outstanding issues. And I think those need to be sorted out at a political level. And I hope very much that during the visit of the Foreign Secretary, progress will be made so that it could be announced by the two foreign ministers. So I think, this is a very, very important project. It will transform the economy of Kumaon in Uttarakhand and of far western Nepal, which is a relatively backward area. So I think, that is one thing that I feel is, very important to do. Second aspect, I think, is, we have two other major hydropower projects. And, together these three projects will mean investment of billions of US dollars into the Nepalese economy. The other two projects, of course, the Arun 3 project is doing well. This is being undertaken by Satluj Jal Vikas Nigam in eastern Nepal. But the third project, which is being done by a private company, GMR, seems to have got stuck. And, while this is a private sector project, I think a lot rides on the successful implementation of this project. And I think, the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India should get involved and see what the problems are and try and resolve these problems. So, if we can move ahead on some of these issues, I think it's going to be very, very significant. Somehow, in the context of India-Nepal relations, we attach a lot of emphasis on our political cooperation. I think the time has now come to put a lot of emphasis on our economic cooperation. And in this context, I also want to mention, we've set up a joint project monitoring and review committee with Nepal. And I was seeing recently that the committee met only after 1 year. And, this is too long a gap. It should meet every 3 months, because the idea is to resolve all the pending issues and obstacles that come up in the implementation of projects. So even though the political relationship may be difficult, I think our economic cooperation, as Arvind said, must continue unimpeded. Coming to some bilateral political issues, I think the Nepalese side is very keen to begin talks, FS level talks on the boundary issue. And the second thing they're very keen is on the EPG report, the report of the eminent persons report, which has not been received or accepted by the two governments. And on this, I feel that the FS level talks on the boundary have to begin. But we have one confusion in our minds in India, and that is that you now in Nepal have a constitutional amendment. So I think India would need some assurance from Nepal that any boundary settlement agreed between two governments will meet parliamentary approval. It will be endorsed by the 2/3 majority in parliament, which means that basically all the political leaders of the parties represented in parliament have to provide this mandate. Now, on the EPG report, it's been 2 years since this report was finalized, and we have not accepted it as yet. And I think one of the reasons was that there was some confusion as to whether the recommendations of such a report would be binding or not. And I think that has been clarified that these are not binding. The two governments can decide what they want to do with the report. But clearly the fact that India has not accepted the report for 2 years means that we have some difficulties with the report. So I think the time has come during the Foreign Secretary's visit to explain our stand very clearly to the Nepalese side on the EPG report. And what I understand from informal conversation with Nepalese friends, that the most important issue for them in the report is the 1950 treaty. So I think, we've already established the Foreign Secretary mechanism to look at reviewing the treaty, and India is very open. Prime Minister Modi said so in 2014 from a public platform, that we are prepared to review the treaty and look at any proposals that Nepal has. So I think this matter can also be taken up in the Foreign Secretary level discussion. And, these have become irritants in the relationship, and I think it is time that we sort of move ahead on this. Now, on China, I think, recently reports have come in. First, of course, the ambassador of China met the Nepalese Prime Minister very late in the evening when this political turmoil was going on in Nepal. Assumption being that she was trying to patch up things within the Nepalese Communist Party. And then there have been reports that the Chinese defense minister is likely to visit Nepal, very, very soon after the foreign secretary's visit. And, to me, this seems somewhat insensitive on the part of Nepal, especially at a time when the India-China relationship, and especially on the defense side, the military side, is so tense. To invite the Chinese defense minister somehow gives the impression that the Nepalese are not bothered too much about Indian sensitivities. Maybe, they want to balance the relation, the visit of our army chief with the Chinese defense minister. But I just find this a little unusual. And this is the second visit of the Chinese defense minister to Nepal in 2 years, in 2 or 3 years. And, there is not too much happening, and General Katwal will testify, there's not too much happening in terms of cooperation between the two armies, between the PLA and the and the Nepalese army. Of course, there have been some joint exercises. So it's not very clear in terms of, what this visit implies or signifies. And, perhaps our Nepalese colleagues, would enlighten us, on this situation. And there is a very strong feeling, especially amongst the communist parties, that the Indo-Pacific approach or the Indo-Pacific policy is aimed against China, and that in fact it is in opposition to the Belt and Road Initiative of China. So if Nepal somehow participates in the Indo-Pacific processes, then in some sense, it is against China. And this seems to be the very strong perception within the Nepalese Communist Party. And so the Americans had come up with a $500 million grant-free assistance program for construction of electricity transmission lines and rural roads. $500 million grant-free under the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And this whole project has been held up on, because some people in the ruling party feel this is part of Indo-Pacific. And Indo-Pacific is something that the Chinese don't like, and so Nepal shouldn't go into it. And interestingly, it's the people opposed to Oli, that is Prachand and Jhalanath Khanal and so on, who are very sensitive to Chinese concerns vis-a-vis MCC, whereas Prime Minister Oli is in fact supporting the MCC project. So this is another issue in the very confusing, political debates in Nepal. I just want to conclude now by saying that there is somehow so much has happened in Nepal. With the new constitution, a lot of transitions from a monarchy to a republic. From a Hindu to a secular country, wanting to graduate now to a developing country status, and the new constitution is a big achievement. But somehow the peace and prosperity dividend that was expected out of all these very dramatic changes in Nepal has really not happened and not occurred, and as a result of which I think there is a certain amount of discontent. And I haven't mentioned COVID, but one of the reasons why there's been a lot of criticism of the Oli government is the handling of COVID, and especially the economic fallout. So in conclusion, I really want to say that I hope India and Nepal can really focus very strongly now on the economic cooperation, on our trade and investment relations, and really, deal with the sort of bread and butter issues that face the people.